Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is longtime listener, poet laureate, and Taya Master Anne-Marie Young. This is your Daily Dose of Happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Anne-Marie, as you know, we do a lot of shows with a lot of guests, bringing in a lot of topics and a lot of interests and so forth. And sometimes the stories, the backstories behind what our guests' lives have been like and what led them to doing what they're doing can be fairly traumatic. That's no less the case today with our guest, Linda Feig Knipe, who's joining us. She's the author of a memoir called Braving Therapy. And first of all, Linda, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. How you doing?
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for having me.
We're so glad to have you. Give the audience a little bit of background. Tell us how this whole story got started.
Well, the story of my writing the book is I'm a retired school counselor, and I have always kind of had the purpose of my life is just trying to help others because I always felt really lucky. So I felt like I had this experience that I could pass along some of my learning about how to look at life and things you should do to overcome difficult situations. The difficult situation that I had is when I was right out of college. Actually, a little bit of in college and out of college. I was sexually assaulted. I was my apartment when I was living alone in Florida. My apartment was broken into, and I was raped. I also had a dating situation that was really humiliating and something I couldn't deal with for a long time when I was in college. So I went for 20 years. I was strong. The guy that broke into my apartment was caught and prosecuted, and I tried therapy for a couple of sessions. Everything was so uncomfortable that I just buried everything and went on with my life. I got married. I became a mother. I was working a professional career. And then when I was in my late 30s, I went back to college for my graduate degree in counselor education. And in the first class, I was triggered by a discussion of therapy, and particularly rape therapy. And I started, when I left class that day, I started with full-blown PTSD symptoms.
Wow.
Yeah. So for a couple of weeks, and it was a first class, so I didn't really know what was going on. And I finally, after a couple of weeks of feeling crazy, I wasn't able to eat. I was not sleeping. I was having lots of intrusive memories and feelings. So I finally made an appointment. I went back talk to my professor. He explained about PTSD, explained that, I kept trying to control my thoughts, and he said that's not going to work, and suggested that I start trying to seek therapy, which is what I did. So the book that I wrote is, it has the backstory, the leading up to the time when I went into therapy, what it was like to go through that experience, because there was a legal component to it and everything back when it happened, and an explanation of how we store, how memory works with trauma, and then particularly what PTSD is and what happens when somebody's trauma becomes post-traumatic stress disorder. And then the body of the book is about seeking therapy and what it's like to pursue therapy. And the learning is that I kept journals the whole time. And I wrote about what I was thinking when I wasn't talking, because I wasn't a really good talker. I didn't do therapy all that well. It took quite a while. And but I wrote about what I was thinking and how I was feeling and about the stuff that I was never ever going to talk about, and how change happens and how my thinking eventually evolved and my perspectives changed and how healing happens.
Mm.
So that's the body of the book. And in the end, I talk about how much more rewarding it is to kind of live authentically and not be afraid.
Which is the hard part of going through therapy, coming out the other side so you can do that, so you can say that.
Right. Well, that's why I titled it Braving Therapy, because it really isn't for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
You have to stick with it all the way to the end.
Mm.
And and I was listening to you and I think Joel talking about whether you can heal from trauma and from PTSD, and that, there are various schools of thought about that. My feeling is it took 5 years for me to get to a point where I really felt like it was behind me and I needed to maintain good mental health. But yeah, I feel like it's behind me.
Mm-hmm. If you were listening to an episode with Joel, he almost certainly talked about what he considers to be the most important piece, the action piece, taking action.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know, how does that fit into your experience and what you went through?
Well, he talked about, it was interesting because I was, I've researched it so much in the last 25 years.
Mm.
And a lot of what he was talking about were things that are somatic in nature, like when you interrupt what's going on in your head with things like EMDR or tapping, or these are all kind of body biological things that you're doing. And it was just, it had me thinking about all of it. But for me, the first step was going to therapy. That was the first action I took. And I really worked at it. I had a lot more going on than just things in my past. When I was in therapy, I was working full time. I was in graduate school. I had 3 little boys and I had a marriage that was melting down.
Mm.
So there were a lot of things I wasn't going to talk about.
Yeah.
One of the early things I said to my therapist is, my marriage is just fine. We're not going to talk about that.
Aha. Okay. Yes. Well, lay that ground rule.
That's right. So, and I think because 20 years later, if I see him maybe once a year and he can still remember that one, he said, yeah, I remember when you said that. And I wrote down, marriage may be an issue. You probably need to talk about it.
It's usually a sign that it's something that needs to be discussed.
Yeah. And I had decided before I even went to therapy, that incident that happened in college that so humiliated me, I was never going to talk about. I told myself as soon as it happened, I was never going to think about it again. And I spent a long time before I went to therapy, when I went into therapy, worried that somehow he would wheedle it out of me. And so there were a lot of things that I was hiding.
That's why people end up in therapy, because they're hiding the stuff. They don't really realize that. I mean, I don't think it's the first thought that goes to their mind.
And when you're really uncomfortable, you're exactly where you need to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how that works. It's one of those things in life that seems unfair when you're going through it.
Yeah. So action plans, when I was in it, I was always working to get better and trying to figure it out. And then after I was really through therapy and I was healthy, I do a lot of wellness practices to stay healthy.
Mm-hmm. Such as, give us an idea.
I've always struggled with my weight, and I had gained a lot of weight, and now I And I've always been, so I was always a Weight Watcher. Every time I would have a child, I would go back to Weight Watchers and lose the weight.
Mm-hmm.
But now I maintain a healthy weight by continuing to go to the meetings, much like AA does, and getting that support and being reminded of all of the healthy things that I need to do and the mindset that I need to keep. I try and exercise regularly, and I try when I'm having a really rough time, and I just went through a period of depression that I haven't had in years, and I still will hide for a while, and I know that I need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So
It's amazing how no matter what we go through, the patterns show up over and over again. They can be, the circumstances will change.
yeah,
But the patterns, you know, the way that we respond to them, boy, that those habits are buried very deeply.
and yeah, and but I was thinking about it because I think that people that not everybody. So let me start out by saying I have a lot of people who just say, "Yeah, I have PTSD now about that." You know, every every difficult thing in their lives that happens is like, "Oh, now I've got PTSD about it." It's,
Yeah.
you know, people have trauma in their lives. We all have traumatic things that happen. And there are a significant number of people who do develop PTSD, but I think that
Sure.
there are probably circumstances that can cause PTSD to happen. It does not happen to everybody that's had something traumatic happen.
Sure.
I do think that I've noticed when I've had some other things, like when I was trying to learn to ski as a grown woman with teenage children, and fell down a mountain and was rolling, and that's, you know, that I kept reliving and some other things that have happened. I do think I have kind of that way of responding to it, like a deer in the headlights, and then re-experiencing things, but I also know what to do about it.
Well, that's a big deal right there.
So yeah, I don't try and avoid it and kind of let it numb me anymore. I know what to do.
And it's helpful to have someone to talk to who you can talk to more than once. I'm going to say it that way. Someone you can trust to talk in that way. And the reason I mentioned that just came to my mind while you were describing what your experience was. I have a good friend who she and I were talking recently on the phone, and she was explaining to me how she has this tendency when she encounters something that is trauma inspired or something like that, she literally does a freeze up. And I realized as she was describing it, I'd seen her do that.
Just
I'd seen it
freezes.
actually happen. And so and when it happened the first time that I saw it, I had no idea what it was, but now I knew what it was. You know, so if she ever needed to, I realized, oh, that's something I can actually help her on, because I know what it looks like. I know I can see what it is now.
Yeah.
Having that kind of recognition from somebody, I think, is important.
And that's my response. It was interesting. I'm someone who freezes, and it was interesting that you guys were talking in another podcast about that. It's pretty typical in a rape situation to freeze. What I also found, and as I was researching the book 20 years down the road, because it happened, well, that happened a long time ago. My therapy was 20 years ago when I had PTSD. Since then, when I was researching the book, there is another, it was fight, flight, freeze. And now they've added fawning, which is in that really dangerous situation, you try to placate or appease your attacker. Kids will try and get closer to their parents who are abusing them. I talked to my attacker, because I thought if I can make him like me a little bit, maybe he won't hurt me.
Mhm.
And so I so I was like, oh, I kind of did that.
Yeah, sure.
So I actually did do that because he called me a few nights later.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what he was thinking, but yeah, he called me up and they caught him from that. So
Wow.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
there's a lot of different ways to go on that conversational point.
Yeah, actually, I did okay, so I'm talking about the book and my learning. What I found when I wrote the book, and it took me over 2 years to write it, and I was so intimidated to put the story out there. I don't I'm not somebody that talks about myself unless like I can impart, some wisdom or something.
Sure.
Otherwise, I'm not really somebody sits down and says, "Okay, tell me all about yourself." It's like I'm not really comfortable doing that. Um, but I was I was really surprised. I was very intimidated about writing the story and putting it out there, especially because I'm a Rotarian. And when some people from Rotary found out, they were like, "Oh, when the book comes out, you're going to have to speak at a Rotary meeting and tell us all about it." And I'm like, "Oh my God, that's the last thing I want is to talk
Mm,
about it to people I know."
yeah,
Um, so then when you're launching a book, it's really important to get a lot of reviews. And so you do reach out to people and you ask them to read all about you in this book.
mm,
And so
sure.
I'd worked on it so long that I'd kind of gotten over that. But then what people were saying about it had nothing to do with my story.
Mm,
So it was really interesting because my learning in in the whole process of therapy and what I wrote about in every chapter was what I was thinking while all of this was going on.
sure.
And there was a lot of ruminating, a lot of beating myself up, which I had done all of my life. Um, how could you be so stupid to do that? How could you have let this happen? How could you have not fought this guy? How could the kind of things that we say to ourselves and we don't say them to anybody else.
You're right. Yeah.
And so what I finally came to understand through all of that long time in therapy was that I needed to start talking about what was really going on in my head. And my therapist was great. In therapy for sexual assault or any PTSD, in that kind of therapy, and he used cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. It's really important that the therapist not direct the conversation, that it come from the person who is in therapy, that they have total control over what they're going to talk about. They need to feel safe.
Makes sense.
So because I wasn't talking, we would sit there in silence a lot of times. Very uncomfortable, but he really, really encouraged me to anything I wanted to talk about. And I was like, and this is the stuff I wrote about. Oh my God, if I start talking about something, he's going to know what I think about.
Mm,
I want to be able to control how other people see me and think about me. So I don't want to give him that ammunition. It took a long, long time for me to realize that I could not get any other perspective but my own unless I started talking. So the funny thing is, when I wrote this book and that dialogue that I was having with myself, and sometimes with him, but
mhm.
mostly with myself, and the writing that I was doing at the time in my journals, really resonated with just about everybody that read the book.
Oh,
Because what I have noticed when I do author talks is that there are really accomplished people in the room who will be, when I'm talking about negative self-talk and like things that they're embarrassed to talk about with anybody else. And these really accomplished people are nodding their heads like, oh, I've got that voice in my head. And then the thing that we have to talk about is how toxic that can be.
Oh,
When
yeah.
you're ruminating on what you're doing wrong, you're not getting anybody else's perspective. And there's a psychologist out there who's done a TED talk on what she calls perfectly hidden depression. And it's in people who seem to be managing everything really well, but they're also beating themselves up and ruminating on things and not getting any other perspective. So that's really the message in my book, and what seems to be resonating with people so much is that self-talk part of it. I have a psychiatrist who reviewed the book, and he had a chance to talk to him. I met him before the book came out, and I asked him if he would review it. And I said, have you ever read a book by a client who actually wrote about all the stuff that was going on in their head that they weren't saying? And he thought for a minute, and he said, I don't think I have. And so when the book came out and he wrote the review, it was all about that. It was about the fact that the stuff, and I'm sure when I gave it to my therapist and asked him to review it to make sure I didn't misrepresent him, I'm sure it was a real revelation to him, some of the things that I was thinking about when I was not talking.
Right. Yeah. The stuff that you were hiding.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's actually something we've talked about a lot here. I mean, Anne-Marie, we talk about the different ways that we're really skilled at beating the crap out of ourselves.
Oh my gosh, our inner critic is so much more brutal than anybody else I've ever met.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've met some mean people.
People always say, you would never talk to anybody else that way.
Right.
You really wouldn't.
Yeah. And it was interesting. I know people have varying opinions about therapy and about therapists. And I think the key is to make sure that you have a good therapist that you feel connected to. But even after I had really gotten through all of my therapy, felt well, revealed everything. My husband at the time and I also went to therapy, and from that we proceeded to a divorce. And I talk about that. It's like we have a very good relationship, and we have a relationship with our boys who are now adults and fathers of their own in their own accord. But, sometimes you have to give something up to get something better, to be able to move forward. And that was the case for both of us. We were mismatched in our marriage.
Oh, yeah.
And we both found other partners who were absolutely wonderful. And I got remarried in 2007, and my husband was really wonderful about being the one that I could talk to if he saw that I was starting to go flat, that I was starting to beat myself up, or things would happen at work that I had been embarrassed by or ruminating about until I buried it and couldn't even remember what it was that was making me depressed. And he was a master at sitting me down and getting me to finally talk, and being so completely non-judgmental about anything that I said, that I finally started to stop being judgmental about myself. I do not beat myself up anymore, which was a lifelong thing that I did.
Congratulations. That's an achievement.
I don't do it anymore. And so my husband 4 years ago had a very fast moving cancer and passed away. And I was really expecting and was told, you're going to go through depression. And I kept waiting for it to come. And I didn't have depression. I felt really grateful that I had him in my life.
Sure.
And I missed him terribly, but I didn't get depressed, and I waited for it. And I think that I used all of the tools that I had learned
Wow.
to be able to continue to talk to people and to not beat myself up. So
That's fabulous. That's really
yeah,
fabulous. I can actually identify with that to a certain degree in that when my father died, he died in 2008, but before the crisis hit. And he had been suffering from Parkinson's disease related symptoms.
yeah,
And
that's
when it got
hard.
into his throat, he couldn't eat anymore. And that's ultimately what led to his demise. So the worst part was actually while he was still alive. And once he passed, I didn't feel grief. I felt relief. Like, oh, wow. And I kept waiting, like you. I was waiting for it was going to hit at any moment, right? And it
Yeah,
never did.
yeah,
It's like, wait a minute, is this the way it works? I didn't understand.
yeah. Yeah, and I think with my mom, I had that experience. She died a year and a half ago, and by then she was in her mid-90s, and it was the same thing. She had Alzheimer's to the point where she had forgotten how to swallow, and so
Mhm.
you know it was coming, but
Right.
um, and that was okay. You do your grieving ahead of time.
Yeah.
When my husband died, it was a month from the time we learned that he had terminal cancer
Wow,
to
that's
the
quick.
time he died. Yeah, and he was, and extremely active and involved in everything, and the entire community was shocked because he was
Mhm.
that kind of guy.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, I'm so grateful that I had him in my life. I'm better for it.
That's fabulous. It's great to have a memory that way. I mean, that's really the way you want to remember somebody.
Yeah, yeah,
When you were writing your book, you were describing earlier how it's always a challenge for you to speak publicly about uh, what the impetus was, which is not surprising. I mean, it's not an easy topic to address, certainly not with people you don't know, let alone people that you know. How did you end up getting to the point where you could feel more comfortable with that? Was it the therapy, or were there other things that you did?
when I was writing the book, I uh, I contacted my therapist, and he was concerned. So this is 20 years later, but he was concerned about my being so forthcoming about things that I was so reluctant to talk about in
Hmm.
therapy. And he was concerned about how it would sit with me in interviews and things. And I think there were two things. One was that I just spent so long working on it, I rewrote it twice.
Wow.
And I was so done with it. It was like, fine.
Whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what really, so I end the therapy part of the book with the story about what happened in college that I was so humiliated by, that
Right.
I held out not talking about that for so long. And I finally realized that if I didn't put that out there, um, a couple of things for therapy, that I would never get better. But then I argued with myself about it. It was a really humiliating situation, and for therapy, that was one thing. But when I was writing the book, I realized that it's stuff that happens to young women all the time,
Mm.
and that if I was not going to talk about the hardest stuff in the book, there was no point writing it, because I either had to be authentic or I might as well just quit.
Mm.
So, and the editor for starters said that's the most powerful chapter in the whole book.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And so my therapist was really concerned about my talking about that.
Right.
By the time the book came out, I was like, okay, if somebody asks me specific questions that are making me uncomfortable or triggering me, I'm just going to say that's what's happening, and explain what it feels like and move on. but I've since found that nobody talks about what happened to me other than to say they were sorry.
Hmm.
But then they go on to talk about themselves, because
Of course.
that's what happens, is they connect to the book, which is exactly what I wanted to happen.
Right.
It was interesting though. So I've been on quite a few podcasts, and it's about, overcoming adversity and all of that. But then my youngest brother is a sheriff's deputy. He's a sergeant investigator, so a sergeant of all of the investigators.
Hmm.
He didn't read my book. He had told me that knowing what happened to me had changed the way that he always dealt with assault victims when he
Really?
was interviewing them. And I put that in the acknowledgement and everything. And still, he bought the book. He gave it to his daughters and his wife and everybody. And I had lunch with him, and I said, "Did you read it?" And he goes, "Well, no." So I handed it to him, and he went on a vacation. He read it, and he called me as soon as he finished it. And he was so excited about the things that he didn't understand or didn't realize, or all of that self-talk. And he's also very, very involved in officer wellness. They have, at the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, they have gotten a lot of clinical social workers for their officers.
Okay.
And they openly talk about PTSD, about trauma, about the kind of things that their officers carry with them,
Sure.
because having a healthy officer on the street is better for the public in the way that they deal with them.
Yeah.
So I did a podcast. The sheriff has a podcast every week, and it's done very professionally in a studio and everything. And I went in, and they had both read the book. The sheriff and my brother was there too. And the sheriff was very enthusiastic about talking about those same kind of things, about the stuff you don't talk about, and beating yourself up and second guessing yourself and all of that. And my brother, he wanted to talk about the legality. He wanted to talk about what happened to me. He wanted to talk about when my rapist called me up a couple of nights later, and about how he was caught and all of that. So that was the only time I've ever talked about it, and it was interesting.
I imagine. I mean, go ahead, Emery. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just wondering, like, by finally making that decision to write it into your book, did it release any of the power that it had over you? Did it feel like, oh, it's no longer controlling me?
I had most of it had not bothered me for years. The date rape in college, I didn't even identify that as a rape until I was several years into therapy.
Right.
And I just felt so culpable for what happened. And it was, what happened was humiliating. And so even though I told my therapist, I never told anybody else. And then when I started to write about it just a few years ago, I told my sister, and that was really hard. And then I fought with myself about it. What changed for me is I was watching Brené Brown, who is a PhD researcher in vulnerability and shame.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a Netflix special that I think was called The Call to Courage. Is referenced in the book. And she talked about when she had done a TED Talk and how she got trolled and how humiliating that was. And then she saw or she read Theodore Roosevelt's Man in the Arena speech. It was the 1910 speech he gave at the Sorbonne called, I know what it's called, The Citizen and the Republic, I believe. Okay. And he talked about how we, when trying to live our lives, if we live all in, if we go full into the arena, we may end up bloody and battered, but at least we're living our lives all in, and that there are going to always be people who are naysayers or who judge us or whatever, but they're just sitting on the sidelines. We're the ones that are living our lives, and that we may come up short, and we may end up completely failing, or we may have fantastic success. But either way, you're not going to have it unless you're all in the arena, not sitting on the sidelines. And so Brene Brown said that story changed her, and now she wakes up every morning and she says, today I'll choose courage over comfort.
Oh, wow.
And that's kind of my mantra now, is that changed me. She said, when you do something all in, you will fail. You are not always going to succeed. There are times you will absolutely fail. It's a given. It's going to happen. Not if you might fail, but at some points you're going to fail. And I thought, well, if I'm going to fail, then let's just get on with it. Just do it. And so that's in the book. That's in the introduction of the book, the man in the arena speech. And today I'll choose courage over comfort. And I've had other people say to me that that's a really important phrase for them.
Yeah, it's a good phrase too. It's memorable.
Yeah, that's Brene Brown.
Yeah, and not only that, not only is it memorable, it's kind of like a phrase that's flipped around, because we normally like to choose comfort, and it's basically saying, nope, I'm not choosing comfort. I'm deliberately choosing courage instead. Which is what makes it kind of stand out to you. It's like, oh yeah, this is something to think about. This is something to remember.
You're to step into the arena of your life.
Yeah, step into the arena.
Yeah,
it's empowering.
Yeah, it really is. It's very exciting.
It's also, I find it anyway, not necessarily that particular phrase, but the concept. I find that the concept is not only empowering, it's joy giving.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, Anne Marie? I mean, I see your smile as I'm saying that. Because I think what happens is when you get used to leaving the comfort zone, or like I like to call it the familiar zone, because there's nothing comfortable about it. But as you get used to leaving it on a regular basis, after a while, first of all, just because you do it regularly, it becomes easier and easier and easier. The first few times you're riding a massive roller coaster, and then the roller coaster gets a little smaller and a little smaller. And finally, after time, it's just, foothills. But while you're going through that process, you are also experiencing a buildup of self-confidence, because what was this massive mountain is now a molehill. It's like, I can handle this. This is all right. And you start to feel good.
You don't get confident by being comfortable.
No, not at all.
And somebody said that recently, just about confidence and comfort, and that you have to be uncomfortable to get confident. And I'll tell you, I'm going to Europe the end of the summer. There are several things that are going on, and I always went with my husband. I never did it alone. I don't speak other languages other than phrases. And so there's a family reunion over there with a European family of my husband's. And they kept saying, when are you, tell us what your reservations are. And I put it off and put it off. And I finally realized when I heard that I was so uncomfortable with traveling alone that I just wasn't doing anything. And so I was like, this is something that I've got to do just to gain more confidence, because I love to travel, and I do a lot of traveling, but that's a big step to do that one alone.
Okay, so basically you've gotten into that experiential frame of mind, where the moment that something comes along that's even somewhat challenging to what you would normally want to do, you jump on it.
Well,
or at least you embrace it in some way.
I'm trying to embrace it. Yeah. It takes me a while to jump.
Well, okay, fair enough. Yeah. But that's what I was talking about when I referred to the confidence building piece, because as you do that regularly, it's the regularity that does it.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're filing away at a rough spot, and the more you file away at it, the less rough it becomes until finally it kind of disappears. It erodes over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And as it happens, you just feel better about yourself. You feel like, oh, well, geez, I handled that. I can handle almost anything.
Yeah. And I think the other part that I think was really important to me in my writing is just kind of this. Well, I grew up in a really loving family. I was very fortunate. I got great siblings, and I felt a lot of joy in my life. And during that dark period when I was in therapy and dealing with PTSD, the joy was just gone. And I will know when I'm well, when the joy comes back, and it has. But I feel like I had this actual epiphany of gratitude probably 7 or 8 years ago when my husband and I have this, it's kind of a shabby little cottage on Lake Ontario. And I was sitting out front. It was a warm summer day, just enjoying the sunshine and the water. And I just had this like feeling of such gratitude for where I was. I didn't want anything else.
Mm.
And I came in and I talked to him about it. I said, I don't know what it is. I just feel so grateful. And he said, well, you work hard and, you give a lot to people. You should feel grateful. And I said, that isn't it at all. I said, I just feel like I'm grateful for all of this beautiful stuff that's there, and I don't want for other things. And that's kind of a new feeling in my life. And I started realizing that when I just look at the good stuff that's come my way, I don't really have feelings of resentment anymore about anything.
Hmm.
I just feel really great. It's what I said about my husband. I mean, I could be very resentful. I'm a little annoyed that he left me. I really had plans that we would be together for a good 30 years,
Sure.
um, but I'm so grateful that he was in my life. I'm so much richer for the experience of him.
Hmm.
So, I live in gratitude now, which which is just such a happy way to live.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, gratitude is considered high vibrational for a reason because it raises your vibration every time that you engage in it.
Yeah, and when I talk to people who keep on pointing out the negatives, and I kind of turn around. I've had heart to hearts with some people who seem to always find something to complain about
Oh, yeah.
because you just
Lots of
can't
opportunities for that in this world, too.
you can't be happy when you're always finding
Uh,
everything that's wrong. And I know that our brains are set up like that. I know that our brains are set up to keep us safe and point out all of the stuff that's a problem. But I think it's just it. My personal philosophy of life is that we are here to go through all of the hard stuff and
mhm.
to figure out those hard things. Like I'm one of the things that you were saying at a different podcast was how many people say that they are um, I don't know if grateful is the right word, but that they welcome the difficult experience that they had because it was so life changing.
Mhm.
And while I wouldn't wish sexual assault or anything that happened to me on anyone, I know that the huge growth in my life came out of that experience, came out of getting therapy, talking with someone who helped me change my perspective on things and made me a more authentic version of who I was,
Yeah.
who I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And I think all of us, we're not owed a good life. I think that if we're lucky, we have hard times that we plow through and grow.
Right.
So,
Well, you mentioned Joel before. Joel is actually the first person I learned this idea from, and he went to give you the very quick story. He had a massive gambling issue, ended up stealing from his own family's business, going to jail for it, losing all his money in Vegas, eating out of a dumpster, homeless. He went through a whole bunch of really horrible crap. And one of the ways that he describes it is it's something like kind of like what you said. He never wants to go through it again. He wouldn't wish it on anybody else, but he would never trade it in for anything else. He would never want it not in his life because he got so much out of what came afterward and what emerged from it.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, I think of my boys, like, I don't want anything horrible to happen in their lives.
Sure.
But I know that the big growth experiences are going to come from the hard things.
Yeah.
So everybody has hard things. And if you embrace what you can learn, even though it's awful going through it, you can either hide. And I think that for a long time, I was hiding. I was doing all the PTSD things with numbing and hiding, avoiding, and nightmares, and probably, well, I felt so crazy I had to do something, but also I was going into school counseling. I couldn't carry my own issues into a counselor program.
Right.
So it was good that I was forced into that position, but my message is, you need to do something, and then you need to stick it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That fits into what I call the 2x4 method. The 2x4 method is where life comes along and taps you on the shoulder and says, you really need to do something about this. And then you ignore it, and it comes along a little bit harder and gives you a shove, and you still don't do anything. And then it comes along and shouts in your face while it's giving you a shove. And then it pulls out the 2x4 if you're still not taking any action, and whacks you up the side of the head. And finally you say, okay, all right, I'll do something about this.
Exactly.
I call it 2x4 therapy. I'm not sure if that's a good term or not.
Yeah.
I've heard the same before, that certainly when you're holding things in, if you don't say it straight, it comes out crooked. So if you don't say it straight away, or if you don't say it, talk about it, it's going to manifest, like you said, Linda. It's going to come back at you in a different way, and it's going to hit you from another direction.
Well, and it's not good for your body. It's everything. When you hold all that negative energy, I'm not sure what it was. I got into a period of really being down to the point where it felt like the depression of old, because when I had PTSD for a lot of years, I had major depression during that time and anxiety. And it was starting to feel like that. And I hurt. My body hurt. And I finally went, and this was so silly. I finally went because I felt so bad that I went to see my doctor and ended up crying through the entire appointment.
Oh.
So, and she was wonderful, and they did some tests, but I then ended up throwing my hat over the fence, so to speak. And I let some friends know via text that I was dealing with depression, so that when I was with them, we could talk about it, because I knew I probably wouldn't say anything face to face. So I did that with a number of people and really started talking, and things just cleared up. So yeah,
that's inspiring when that happens, because then you feel like now there's hope.
Yeah.
But it's also such a brave thing to do. It's just putting it out there. I'm feeling like this. I'm not feeling okay. Such a brave thing to do.
Well, I know what to do. The problem is, you feel, when you're depressed, you feel so much chaos in your head that you don't know what to talk about. I wouldn't know what to say to anybody. And I didn't know where it was coming from. I think I've had a lot of stuff going on. I think I was just really missing my husband. I was feeling very alone, and some things like that. But I know what to do. And so then and I did go and see my therapist. Like I said, I go maybe once a year when I feel like I need to talk. And even then it was like, oh my gosh, you're just not doing it for me. And he said something what he told me, I said, I just heard somebody say that they don't tell anybody when they're depressed because they have a lot of good friends and they don't want to get love bombed when they're depressed. And I said, that's how I feel. I don't want to get love bombed. And he said, then why don't you tell people what it is that you need? And I was like, what a good idea.
Okay.
And it was like, after talking with him for 45 minutes, I was like, that's what I needed. Thanks. And so I did. I reached out to a couple of good friends I was going to be spending some time with. And I just said, I'm just feeling, by the time I was doing some talking, I was feeling fine again. So
yeah, it's an amazing thing to break through on stuff and come out the other side and realize, well, first of all, you realize that what was really bothering you, what was hanging over you, suddenly isn't as bad as it was.
right.
That alone is a bit of a shock.
Yes.
And realizing you actually didn't have to do a whole lot. It was more about shifting a mind than anything else. Your physical action was fairly minimal at that point.
Yeah. That was what my husband would do. He was a college dean. So he did a lot of advising. And when he would sit down with me and we would finally get to the crux of what I was so embarrassed by, something that had happened at work or whatever, and he would just have some kind of practical response to it. Like, my therapist did the same when I finally told him what happened when I was in college. And he said to me, how old were you? And I said, 19. He said, so you were a kid?
Mhm.
And I was like, yeah. And he said, do you know kids, you're a school counselor, do you know kids that make stupid decisions sometimes?
Mm.
And I was like, yeah. And he said, you were a kid. He said, you're looking at it from your perspective of being a 40-year-old.
Mm.
Or a kid. And that totally changed the way that I had been looking at myself. And it took me years to say that. But we do, we need that. We need somebody else's perspective. If we don't say what we're thinking, then the only perspective we have is our own.
Yeah.
And that's not helping.
No,
Yeah.
I agree totally. It's one of the big things that I've learned the most from doing the podcast. Because over the last 12 and a half years, I've interviewed hundreds of people, plus all the wonderful co-hosts that I have, like Anne-Marie. And it's probably the one thing I value more than anything else, all the different perspectives.
Yeah.
And so many of them. I mean, you do enough of these shows and you really begin to realize there are a lot more perspectives than I thought there were.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I should have known. Theoretically, I should have known. There are 7 billion people on the planet. There are going to be 7 billion perspectives. It's one thing to know it abstractly. It's another thing to experience it face to face. It's really a very different experience when you're actually hearing it coming out of somebody else's mouth.
Yeah.
Well, that's 7 million people who've had completely different lives, completely different experiences, and can just put their own perspective onto everything.
Yeah.
That's the glorious thing about us.
It is. Yeah.
I find it fascinating. I was a psychology major in my undergrad, and then when I did go back for school counseling, and I just find the what makes people tick to be the most interesting thing in the world to me.
That's fabulous, because among other things, that makes it easier to do the communicating, to actually connect and talk.
Yeah.
That's what
So
draws you in. So yeah, that's great.
yeah, so that's pretty much my story in a nutshell.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm pretty old now. I have wisdom, you know. I ended the book that way. So
Okay. That's good. That's good. Now the name of the book is Braving Therapy. I presume it's available everywhere.
yes, it is. It's on Amazon and Kindle, of course, and it can be ordered through any bookstores.
Okay.
That anybody wants, or Barnes and Noble.
Do you welcome contact from people who are looking for advice and such?
Yeah, nobody's asked me for advice. That's probably safe, but I have a website and a Facebook page. They're both L Feig Knipe. That's what the book's written under, is L Feig Knipe.
Okay.
That was when I was still having a hard time owning the story. So
Okay.
yeah. So it's lfeigknipe.com.
Okay. And we'll include a link to that to make it easy for people to find it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Jen will take care of that.
Or Facebook page.
Oh, okay. So Facebook's a good place to catch you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's one of the things we like to make sure we do as we're winding up a show. But there are a couple other things we like to do. One of them is I like to turn to Anne-Marie, or whoever my co-host is today. Obviously, Anne-Marie, who's a wonderful co-host, and who actually didn't have a whole lot of technical issues today, which is a wonderful thing. So hey, how about that?
Oh, thank you. I'm very grateful today for that.
That's right. Yeah. But I always like to ask her for her perspective on, how she ties up the conversation we had today, because Anne-Marie is actually a former listener who became a co-host. And so I always think of her as being kind of representative of the listeners. So I'm always curious, like, how is she going to, tie all this together in her mind? What's her perception going to be? There's the perception thing again, right? So what's your perception today, Anne-Marie?
I'm very curious.
Well, apart from the whole courage over comfort, which was just like, whoa, that's an amazing thing. I think for me, what I took from that is just the importance of therapy and how you persevered with it and how beneficial it was. It's so nice to hear that gorgeous story and the fact that it was such a success for you, because you're right, a lot of people give up because you do go down before you come back up, and a lot of people give up, or even if they don't gel with their therapist, you can just go to another person. You can go to find another therapist who works for you. So it's really important, if you're not able to solve the things in your mind and get the clarity and clear your head, to talk it through with someone else. So I just love that message and just being so open and successful with it. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you. I do have some pages for people that want to send me their email about how to find therapists and what to look for, and the kind of questions that you want to ask, and the kind of things that you need to overcome, because man, it's a tough conversation that you're having with yourself when you're throwing up obstacles all the time.
Yes.
So
well, we're very good at it. I mean, it's nice to have a skill. It might not be the best skill to have, but we're really, really good at it.
But I'm also thinking just sitting in that silence is difficult as well.
Yes. Very true. And then one last final thing I like to do with every episode, and if you were listening to a couple episodes, you probably know about this one, but we're living in an age where we're now doing things like podcasts, or people are doing books. They're writing books like you did, or they're creating courses or whatever, and their content is being consumed by people that they've never seen, never met, and they don't know what's going on with it. But one thing that I have learned is, in most cases where people are consuming it, they're taking some piece of it, maybe not the whole thing, but some piece of it, and they're applying it, and they're getting some benefit out of it. And we never hear about that. And we never know about that. I mean, you mentioned, you don't get a lot of people actually reaching out and talking to you. And yet I guarantee you, there are people who have been consuming your material and getting benefit out of it and applying it in their lives in ways you don't even know about. And that's where I like to step in and say, Linda, on behalf of those people you've never met and never seen and never will meet, never will see, who you've been helping in ways you didn't even know about. On their behalf, thank you for what you're doing, because you're
Oh,
making a
thank
difference in this
you.
world.
Thank you so much.
I think it's really, really important. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Good stuff. Congratulations on writing the book. That's a tough thing to do, to write a book on something that is that traumatic. So congratulations on doing that.
Oh,
And
thank you.
yeah, continue on your path, because you're on a really good path. Thank you for sharing it.
Well,
And
thank you
enjoy
for
your trip
having
to
me.
Europe.
Pardon me?
And enjoy your trip to Europe.
Oh, I'm sure I will. I've got people, so I'm not going to be trying to travel. I would never do it with a backpack by myself. I'm not that brave.
You're not one of those. Okay. Yeah. Well, obviously enjoy the trip too. That's a wonderful thing. So thank you very much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. And we will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.